What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Shuttle Drive. In today's episode, I have none other than the legend himself, Mr. Corran Addison. I've always wanted to talk to him on a good podcast setting like this. So we managed to get our schedules lined up here. So yeah, let's get into it now. So hey, Corran, what's up, buddy?
It's good to be here. And speaking of legends, you become one in your own right. So we're both happy.
Well, we're working away at it, huh? Yeah, Corran, we'll get into it. I won't take up too much of your time here. One of the things, me and you have actually talked about this in the past too, and I've talked to a lot of other people about it too, is when we, there was a little thing on, Facebook about starting people out in creek boats. And when you start people out, new paddlers out in I get a lot of questions myself because I paddle a lot of different boats. I get a lot of questions, and I'm kind of like a mix. I kind of feel the person out, like what they're wanting to get out of paddling. If they're just wanting to be taken care of down the river and not really progress that much, I just want to get out and float around and just kind of I'm like, do you want to really progress or just kind of be taken care of? Usually I'll suggest those people in creek boats, Jackson Z3s or something like that, to say, hey, but this is what you're going to get out of it. And then if they say, I want to really push and drive, have a lot of fun, that's where I'll go more like a Wave Sport Diesel or a Remix or something along a half slice, like a Ripper or Rewind. I go that route if they're wanting to get more progression. So I just wanted to bring you on and kind of get your opinion on this. I know you definitely have some opinions, whether we agree with them or not, but hey, don't we all? But I want to hear your opinion. So Corran, you go ahead and take it away, man. I know you just released a new boat, the Soul Booster. And so feel free, just whatever, man.
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head with your opening statement there, which is it really depends on what people want to get out of entering the sport of whitewater kayaking. I think to assume that people who are getting into the sport know what they want to get out of it is, I think that's a leap. They might have their own ideas of what they think they're going to want to get out of it as they come into the sport. And that might be true based on other things that they do. You might have someone who's been skiing for 25 years and they're still on green slopes and easy blues. And they've owned a mountain bike since mountain bikes came out, but they only ever ride on dirt roads. And they know they never get beyond these points in the activities that they do. Mm-hmm. And so they have a good idea of what is appealing about whitewater. And they just want to be outside and they want to be with their friends and they want to get splashed in the face and enjoy the sunshine, and they're not going to be the first people on the water in the beginning of the season or the last people out. Yeah. And definitely, I would agree with you that putting someone like that in either a creek boat or a bigger river runner, and by bigger river runner, I would, like modern boat would be, for example, the Dancer, or otherwise you've got, I would consider the Wave Sport Diesel, or maybe the Mamba, the Dagger Mamba as a good example of a lot of people actually creeked in that boat because it was very good at it, but it was a little bit more sporty than, say, the Nomad, just for the boat of that era. Yeah. Okay. And I think that's a good thing to do. But for most people who, again, barring the exceptions of that guy that, knows that they want to get into waterfalls, or the person who's especially if you're dealing with kids who immediately they're going to be drawn to ICF freestyle, But I think when you're talking about adults, people who they're already adults when they take up whitewater kayaking, I think it's safe to assume that they don't really know what it is about whitewater kayaking that they're going to want to do and where they're going to want to go. And I don't feel that putting him in a creek boat is maybe except for the first 30, 40 minutes where it's just confidence inspiring, okay? Mm-hmm. I don't think it does them any favors. And the way one example that I've used is it's like someone says they want to learn to ride motorcycles. And you don't know if they want to do motocross, or street bike, or Harley, or whatever it is. Okay, they don't know what it is about motorcycle. They might have an idea, but they don't know what they want to learn. And you go, oh, well, you know what? The easiest kind of motorcycle to learn on is a three-wheeler Can-Am.
Yeah,
well, that's true.
That is true.
It is.
That's a good analogy.
But you're not going to learn, you're going to learn how the handlebars work. You're going to learn how shifting works. You're going to learn about dealing with the fear and having to pay attention to cars around you because you don't have a carcass around you, but you're never going to learn how to turn the bike on edge. You're never going to learn what
any
kind
type
of lines
leaning
you
or
need to
anything.
take on on the road or on a track if you're on a three-wheeler. So yeah, sure, it's confidence inspiring and you feel safe and you feel good. And if you're in your 50s and you decide that you want to have wind in your hair, a Can-Am is a great option, okay?
Yeah,
But
for
it's
sure.
not a great option for someone who actually wants to learn how to ride a motorcycle. You're actually doing them a disservice. Better for them to feel wobbly for 30 minutes when they first get on a motorcycle and progress from there. So that's an analogy that I use.
That's pretty good. Yeah, that's a good analogy, especially someone that rides a bike too. You know, I've rode motorcycles and I know you have too. So yeah.
Yeah, so and so I don't teach as much as a dedicated school, but I've been teaching kayaking since I was 13, 14 years old with my dad's operation, and with my retail store now, we have a kayak a school in the store. We do maybe 100 people a year there, and what I find is that yes, when you put people in a creek boat for the first 30 minutes or so, most of the time it's confidence inspiring, but by the end of a 1 hour lesson, you already started to see a drift, a separation of skill sets, even with people who are not naturally sportive. That person that I just described earlier on, who they've been skiing for 30 years, but they're still on blue slopes. Even that kind of person, they learn that the boat responds to weight shifts forward and back and side to side, and they don't learn that in the creek boats. And while they might catch an edge every now and then, and it might spook them or flip them out, if they're not someone who's easily spooked, it'll give them a little but they learn from that. And I find that even in the first hour, they progress, but particularly after the first hour, they really do progress much faster and they become much better paddlers. I'm not talking about putting them in like a full slice. Like we're not talking about an F-bomb or an ozone or what's it, the superfuge or whatever the new thing is from.
Oh, the supernova. Yeah.
Supernova, right?
Yeah.
That supernova. I'm not talking about that. All right.
Yeah.
Or an ICF freestyle boat. The Rockstar 5 or whatever. I'm not talking about those things. I'm talking about a boat that has enough volume to sit on top of the water, but it has enough edge to where you can use it. And if you do it a little bit wrong, it goes, still confidence inspiring. Like the boat that I put people in is the Disco.
Oh, wow.
And it's not ideal. It's not ideal. It's a little bit short. It's a little bit slow, but it's forgiving. It's got enough volume. It sits on top of the water. The back edge is not grabby. They're not getting flipped over all the time. They'll get back-ended and stuff because it's short, when you're putting people on class 2 easy whitewater, in the Southeast, let's say, for example, the Nantahala, there's nothing on there that's going to back-ender a Disco. So it's fine. Maybe if you were learning on the on the Akoi, for example, then and I just find that they progress faster and they become not only better paddlers, but they enjoy the paddling experience more. And everybody's different, but that's been my experience.
Yeah. What's your opinion on I agree. Like something like that. I definitely agree with you. What's your opinion of something like a half slice, say like a Gonzo or a Ripper or a Rewind or something?
Yeah, I think it takes, all of those boats. I mean, they're lots of fun. There's a reason why they're selling so well, because they're a hell of a lot of fun. All of these new half slices are really, really good fun. But I think that the sterns on the things are a little too grabby.
Okay.
For a lot of people who are learning. The Gonzo has more volume in the stern than the Rippers and, for example, the Rewinds and boats like that, but it has more vertical sidewall. So it's just as grabby for different reasons than, some of the other boats out there, even though it has more volume in the back of the boat. I just don't think half slices, obviously there are those guys that a half slice will work for, and it's particularly if you're younger, if you're an accomplished skier, snowboarder, skateboarder, you do other sports, maybe surfer or paddleboarder, whatever, and then you're moving over towards kayaking, you'll probably learn to deal with the half slice very, very quickly, and you'll progress through that. But I think, again, when you take your average person, if you look at kayaking overall, and you look at the 100,000 paddlers in the world who paddle whitewater, around the world, some of whom have been in the sport for 40, 50 years, and some of whom have been in the sport for 2, 3 years, and you took an average overall, I think you'd probably find that the average skill of them, by average, I mean probably 60% or more are people who they're at best class 3 paddlers, and they never get beyond that. A half slice is a lot of boat for, with an exception, the exceptions of like the RPM, which was so successful in its day.
Yeah, that's kind of what I started out in, was an RPM. Yeah.
Yeah, and it had a super slicey tail on the thing, but also you got to remember where people were learning in those boats. It was the Husky and the Akoi, but more the
Natahala. Yeah.
And, things like that, where, it was there, it was grabby, but it was such an easy boat to roll that it kind of compensated for the fact that the stern was grabby, Planing holes boats are a little bit more difficult to roll than the round cigar-shaped boat, but you get more out of it, we all know that. We don't have to hash the planing boat versus displacement hole type boats. So I think there's a place for the half slice and I don't want to hop on beginners, because I think you're only a beginner for a very short period of time. Really, we're talking about intermediates. You progress beyond beginner very rapidly, and beginners don't buy boats, intermediates buy boats, because even if you are a beginner, you take a class, you take a 2-hour class, you buy a boat,
and rent a boat or something. Yeah.
But even if you bought a boat after coming out of your class, very quickly you're an intermediate paddler. Very, very rapidly. The question is do you progress beyond that intermediate paddler, to an advanced intermediate or even advanced? And as I said, a majority of paddlers never do. They remain an intermediate or advanced intermediate paddler their whole lives, their whole paddling career.
That's fair. Yeah, I believe that. I agree that I think a majority that I've seen is always right in that 2, 3+ range, and they just stay there. I know tons of people that just stay in that range and they never want to go past it. And they're
happy.
And they're happy, and there's nothing wrong with that.
What attracted them to kayaking wasn't to be scared, it was just to be outside.
Yeah, it's like the most they're going to do is a Koi and probably Teleco, and that's it. And I'm like, hey, more power to you. Nothing wrong with that. Yeah, and I'm like, hey, they're having a great time.
Yeah, so there are going to be those people who get in the half slice. There are going to be people who get in the ICF freestyle boat. There are going to be people who get in the creek boat who realize very quickly that they did the Teleco and they loved it and they want more. They're going to be those people. But for the majority of people, I don't think that's the case. And there's this whole classification of boat that was very prevalent 20 years ago to about 10 years ago, which is the playful river runner. It was, you had the Gus and the Hoss, and you had the Booster, and you had
Dagger had the GT series.
Exactly, the GT. And then even more recently, Jackson had the Fun Runner.
I remember the Fun Runner. Yeah.
Now the Fun Runner stopped selling. Clay made a good point. Clay Wright made a good point the other day when somebody asked him, well, why did Jackson stop making the Fun Runner? And he goes, well, generally manufacturers stop making boats right after people stop buying them.
That's true.
You don't
want a whole inventory of those things.
But was it because they were pushing the antics, or was it because people really stopped buying the Fun Runner, or did they push people into the antics and into the Z3? The GT is a very, very old boat, and then what is it? It was the Inner Zones, I think it was from Piranha.
Piranha had that Inner Zone series, yeah.
Yeah, it was the Inner Zones. I mean, obviously all the boats back, the playful river runners boats back then, they also had very low volume bows, which made them difficult through wave trains, and they made them tippier than they needed to be because you had the bow loading up as well as the stern. They had low knees, which made them uncomfortable, and your feet were crammed, and so there were problems with those boats. But I think they produced a generation of paddlers who, for a brief period of time, like a 15-year period of time, were much more proficient than the group who learned in the dances and the group who have since learned in the creek boats. With the creek boats are the modern dances, right? They're the modern
pretty much, yeah,
version of that boat. Okay, so there was this generation, 1990 to 2005, that learned to paddle, who, relative to the before and the after, have a much higher skill set and much greater understanding of water dynamics and how their boats work at the water and what they can do in a boat than the generations before and after. And I think a lot of that has to do, not all of it, but I think a lot of it has to do with what they learned in and what they paddled and what they bought.
where they started, you think, is where that all goes back to, where you started?
Yeah, because they learned in planing whole boats. So okay, so by the mid 1990s, everybody kind of had something planing whole-ish, even if it wasn't
Mhm.
what we consider planing whole by today. You know, you had the perception whip and whiplash, which had a planish center with
Yeah.
displacement ends. You had the stubby and the kinetic, you know, and the Godzilla, and you know, Dagger quickly had the Vertigo that had a real planing hole on it.
Yeah.
Necky, Rip and Jive, the Riot Hammer, you know. So people got into these planing hole-ish or planing hole boats. They had edges. You could use the edges. They weren't punishing. I mean, the Fury was punishing, but the other planing hole boats weren't punishing. If you learned in them, if you came from the Dancer era and you got into those boats, you struggled because it was so different. But if you learned in those boats, it wasn't a struggle. And you know, because it's all you knew. That's what you knew. It's what you learned. And you learned immediately that boats don't roll; they go clunk, 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 clunk. Which is what
like a box, almost, kind of like.
Yeah. And you learned that you could be sideways in the current, and the boat would just slip rather than it would catch and flip or catch and move you downstream. You know, and that was sort of the end of the era of the RPM type boat. You know, even though we've seen, you know, the Brop and the, you know, boats like that come back with, you know, and the Chile, and you know, you've got displacement hull boats that have come back in the hot size, but it's for a different reason. And those designers have said, well, we just don't care about wave performance, and you see a lot of that coming out of Europe where they just don't have waves, so they don't care panels on a wave. They don't care, you know, because they don't have any. So they're, you know, displacement hull boats tend to paddle down a river more fluidly than a planing whole boat. It's a more fluid, graceful sensation. It just is. So why put a planing whole boat that's designed to do something that you don't have access to, you know? So I think that, you know, I wouldn't say we want to go back and put people back into those boats from 15 years ago. They had their issues.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think that it's unfortunate that and it's not the market, it's honestly, it's the designers and the manufacturers have become so, I think, tied up, tunnel vision. And we've done this before. When the super slice, you know, the triple X's and the dominatrixes, and you know,
early 2000s. Yeah,
when these super slice boats came along, and we were absolutely focused and convinced that that's what everybody wanted to do, and it's all we produced. You know, and we all got tunnel vision, and when it wasn't that, it was running the biggest, hardest, meanest, gnarliest waterfalls.
Yep.
Which is, again, we've kind of gone back towards that now. And so you're either building boats to go out and win the world championships in our ICF events in freestyle, or to go and beat Dane Jackson running the craziest waterfall in the world. And the vast majority of people don't fit in either of those.
No, they're right dead center.
Yeah, and then you've got, you know, the half slices, which people go, oh, well, the half slices kind of address that. And I don't think they do, because the tails are it's too much for most people.
Yeah, for like completely green type people. I think the half slices are great for those intermediate to advanced that are wanting to really like come out of something, say like a, you know, like a remix or booster or something. Then they want to go to this level. That's my opinion of a half slice.
Yeah. Well, I would say you're an advanced intermediate. You know, I use my wife as a good example of this. You know, she's an intermediate paddler. She's been paddling for 20 years. She's not very good. She never will be very good. She can't roll, and she can't roll because of a medical condition, which she can't be inverted. So when she does flip over, she swims. But she has a good skill set. She can paddle class 3+ on a SUP, on a paddleboard. She's an accomplished surfer. She's surfed in Hawaii. She's very comfortable in the water. She's an accomplished snowboarder and skier. So she's a good athlete. But she's an intermediate paddler. And, you know, I've put her in the Gonzo, and there's no reward. There's no reward for having that grabby tail. She doesn't get anything out of it, because in her case, she can't roll. In the case of other people, they've got bad rolls, which is a lot of people have bad rolls. Then you've got all these people who don't like to be inverted, or they get spooked when they get inverted.
Yeah, true.
And then if you're a beginner paddler and you're learning, especially if you're learning in the West Coast where the water's cold,
you don't want to be upside down.
You don't want to be upside down. You don't want to be swimming. But even if you're not, if you swim 10 times on your 5K or 10K river trip, it's tiring and it's irritating. So yeah, again, there are those paddlers who will come out of a what I would call a playful river runner and be like, yeah, I want to start squirting, like crazy, and I want to get into a half slice, and absolutely there are those people out there. But I went from my wife being in a gonzo, and I stuck her in a fluid spice, which she really liked. I put her in a booster, which she really liked, booster 60. She's 130 something pounds. So the booster 60 was big enough on her to where the tail wasn't,
the Riot booster, the older Riot booster, correct?
The older Riot booster, the original booster.
Yeah, okay.
60, yeah. So it's too big for her to squirt, but the tail's small enough for her to pivot turn. So
yeah.
you can drop the tail and free the bow and turn the boat, but not squirt it. Not so much with the fluid spice, it's a bit big. Put her in a Dragorosi pintail, which also had that volume behind the cockpit, kind of like the Gonzo, had that volume behind the cockpit, but it had more flare to the sidewall. It was a little bit shorter. The Gonzo is 8.6. That's a lot of boat out there. That's the thing with the half slices. It's a lot of boat. You consider the size of the waves that most people are learning to surf on. Think about the Nantahala. What's that classic surf wave called? It's a surf spot. Isn't it called surf spot?
Corey Rapid or something. There's
something like that. It's like halfway down the run.
Yeah.
And it's this tiny little wave. A 9-foot boat or an 8.5 foot, it's huge in that wave.
Yeah.
And I see a freestyle boat, it's irritating to paddle. A 6-foot boat, they're not fun to paddle around.
They're like a box.
Yeah. So again, the booster at 7.2, the fluid spice at I think it was like 7.4, 7.5. You got these boats in that range where they're short enough to fit in these tiny waves, they're long enough to have some speed. That kind of size of wave, look at the number of people who paddle the Nantahala, and they just kind of float down the river, and they might do 1 or 2 surfs at the surfing spot, and then they move on downstream. They're not going to play in the hole at the bottom below, Lesa Wesa,
they don't even, the freestyle hole. A lot of people won't even, they take out way before it.
Right. They're not even going to go in that.
Yeah.
So again, you go to the Ocoee and you've got that play, you get staging eddy below Grumpy's, you got staging eddy, and then you got that little wave in staging eddy. People play in that. A 9-foot boat, that's a lot of boat.
It's hard, but yeah.
But you got to have a skill set.
Yeah.
A 7-foot boat will fit in, will fit in that. So I feel like most people are better served, and I use my wife as a good example of that. And then of course all the people that I teach. And now I'm putting them in discos, and it does work at 6.5 feet. It's better than an ICF boat, but it's still short. It's still slow to move around the river. To really get the most out of a disco, you got to have a decent skill set, and it works for an intermediate and a beginner, but it's not ideal.
Yeah. So it comes in at 6'6", which by today's standards, as far as a full-on whole boat, that's kind of big.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It is kind of long, and it doesn't, it has more speed than just, I'm using the Rockstar as an example, just because it's easy, but it has more speed than that, or the Jed, or things like that. But it's still a very small boat, and it's okay if you're on really small stuff, but as soon as you need to move around the river, it's not great.
So 25.5 inches wide. So
yeah, it's stable, it's stable, and it's got the volume, it's 58 gallons on a boat that's 6'6", so it's got a lot of volume in it. And it's a pretty forgiving boat. It's a very forgiving boat. It's just not long enough. It's just a little slow for people to make ferry moves across fast water, or if they need to move around the river. It's just a little bit slow to paddle around for people with inefficient forward strokes, tentative strokes, your classic intermediate,
Yeah, and it's full on planing.
It's full on planing, but it's got very flared sidewalls. So it's very
I see that.
It's very, very forgiving boat. It's a great boat. If you took the disco and just slapped 6 inches on each end, you've got the speed. You could change nothing else. You could just literally where the boat comes down to the ends and just keep it going with slicey ends on the thing, if you like, and which is kind of what the Dragorosi pintail is a little bit. Is that kind of shape?
Yeah, I've seen the pintail. Yeah.
And I just, it's just strange to me, even though I understand it. I mean, I was as much to blame as anybody else back in the 90s and the early 2000s. for being so completely focused on freestyle and thinking that everybody who got into the sport wanted to be a freestyle paddler.
They kind of
And
did.
then, you get around 2010 and everybody's going to be a creek boater,
Yeah.
I'm as guilty as everybody else in that. But, with the store, with my wife now paddling, she's, my son is getting better and better at 8 years old. He's in solid class 3. He's getting better. I realized the kind of boats that he needed and the boats I was designing for him. And if you take those boats and you scale them up to an adult size, you end up with a booster.
And that's let's go ahead and take a look at that. So the booster is something, I think you've had this in composite already, correct?
Yeah, I've had it for a year and a half in composite. So I made one for my wife because she was in the disco and it was just too slow to move around. She couldn't get across some currents. She couldn't get from the eddy onto some waves where you got to bust over a diagonal. But once she was on a little wave or something, the disco was a good boat. It let her get away with murder. She could do anything she liked in the boats. So the disco was a really good foundation for her, but it was just too slow to paddle around. And so I made her a composite version of of what is now the booster. And I started with the booster. I put her in the booster and she paddled it and she liked it. But the knees were low and the nose rocker was low and the bow was loading up a little bit. And so, I started with the booster, but immediately started to make some changes to it. And the other thing as well is the stern rocker, it's fast, the original booster, but it was a little, like it would push you into the wave too much and then the low bow rocker would drive the nose in,
Yeah, those lower bow rocker bows back in the day, you do something, you come out and you do like a hard kick rocker right at the tip on a lot of yours. Yeah. I'm just noticing that on the booster, it comes out and it just goes like a hard kick. It's not like a progressive rocker. Am I correct?
So I've done that a little bit on my play boats. And the reason is I've carried my water line for paddling speed, but then I've got the tip out of the water so that you can go down a wave with an air brace and the boat just goes, and it doesn't plow into the bottom. But if you make the rocker more progressive, kind of like what Corran has done with the new Ripper 2, where the bow rocker starts right under the seat, which I tend to do with my creek boats. It starts right under the seat. And the idea there is when you're paddling is that nose is high and dry all the time, whereas that kick rocker is going to be a little bit more slappy in waves when you're paddling down. There's no free lunch. Everything you do,
there's a trade-off on everything you do.
Yeah, everything you do has a trade-off. And I just found that on something like I did it on the Glide and it worked very, very well on the Glide. And so I carried it over to the new booster, where I try to keep that waterline, that flatter waterline section through the center of the boat for paddling speed, and then scoop up the tail a little bit so that the back would drop a little bit on a wave and help lift the nose, and then put all that nose rocker so you could air brace through everything and be fine,
Yeah, I'm seeing
and a lot of people do that. They air brace everything.
You've definitely, that's become a lot of your style right there on your boats. Yeah, way how that kind of like small kick rocker right in the tips right there.
Yeah, and it's on the play boats. It's not all the play boats. The river play boats. My creek boats tend to rock early. From right under basically right under your knees. And like the H3 not the H3, the Z3 went a different direction where, they carried their rocker very, very flat. Yeah. So you see on the Glide there how I carry the planing surface way far forward, and then it's all up in the nose of the boat,
Yeah, it actually is like past almost where the feet are.
Yeah.
That's about where your feet are. And then it starts a hard rocker kick right there and it stays very planing. Yeah, man, that's that. One thing I've been wanting to ask you, you've got away from doing the hexagon pattern. Is that something that you just don't want to do anymore? Or was it because of molding, or is it just something you just don't feel like you need to do anymore?
You mean the texturing, like the texturing on the bottom of the boats?
Yes, the hexagon pattern that was on the older Trickster, Dominatrix, right? And all that.
Well, it started off as dimples, and then it went to like that we had different kinds of shapes that we played with. The glider was a crosshatch and the grind was a crosshatch. And then we went to more of a sort of concentric circles with sort of leading lines out. And so, a lot of this was water flow testing that we were doing of what would help the boat do what we wanted to do. And a lot of this had to do with the fact that prototyping was a more cumbersome and slow process back in the day because
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
you couldn't do it on a computer. Everything you did was by hand. You had to shape something, then you had to make a physical boat, then you had to paddle it. And so most of the time you do 1 or 2 prototypes and you go to production, right? So the development of rocker profiles, sidewall profiles, edge shapes, all that was very, very slow. It was over multiple generations of boats. The Glide was an exception to that, where we did 13 prototypes of the Glide, which was very unusual, but it took us
That
2
is
years.
very unusual.
It took us 2 years to bring that to market from when we started it to when it finally came to market, So the rocker shapes and the sidewall shapes and the shape of the edges, where that first edge was, how wide the planing section was, how much lift we had on the secondary edge, whether it was a flat to a sidewall, to a curved sidewall, to a flat sidewall, whether we had a scoop, did that scoop then curve back down, or did it curve up and then go flat, or did it go out at an angle and then turn to go flat, to turn back down? Did it have a little bit of a square part on it? So all these things that various people were trying and doing things, it was all very thumbsucky, where you would do one on a boat, you would try it, you put the boat in production, and then you would try an evolution of that theory, on the next boats. And Wave Sport tended to hook their rails down. Piranha would kind of go up and then go flat and had like a little flat section on the outside.
And Dagger kind of did that. Yeah, Dagger did more like when Lyle was doing it. He almost had the same edge on everything. It would just come out and step. It was
right.
Like
so and I was doing that the early days of Right, where it was flat, turn, sidewall.
There you go.
And they weren't that loose by today's standards. And so what I found was that if you broke up the surface, the idea of the edge is to break up the tension on the water, to allow it to release. Okay, that's what that edge does.
Yes.
It allows the water moving under the boat to separate from the boat, and that's what makes it skid free and slide free. Everybody thinks it's for carving, but not really. A round rail will carve more efficiently than a hard edge, unless it's really on edge and you're really driving it in. If you see pictures and videos of me, how aggressively on rail I am in my carves. If you're carving with a 20, 30 degree boat angle lean, those edges would be better off round than angled. They don't really help you for carving if you don't really engage them. It's for release. And what those textures on the bottom of the boats did was they pre-released the water as it moved down to the bottom of the boat. It would already start to release from the boat before it got to the edge. And so those things were compensating for the fact that our edge shapes were not that good.
Okay, that's what that helped with a lot.
That's what that helped with. Once we started getting into computers, like the Glide, I did 38 prototype versions on computer.
Yeah, that was something I've been wanting to ask you. I think we had talked about this before. You don't really have to prototype nowadays because you have a lot of fluid dynamics type software.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's always good to paddle a boat, all right? It's always good
for
to
sure. Real world, yeah.
Yeah, but usually one prototype is all it takes, because you'll do, a dozen or more prototypes on computer with computer simulation, then build a boat, paddle it, keep the stuff that you like, the stuff that you go, oh, this isn't quite doing what I thought it was going to do. Again, you go back to computer simulation, and then you go straight to the mold maker. And they come out at 99% of what you wanted it to be. And that 99% is way, way, way better than anything we were doing in the past, because it was so complex and expensive and time consuming. And a lot of the time back then as well, as a boat was a chopped up version of a previous boat.
Yeah.
The Disco, we took the Glide plug and cut the ends off it. That's
to make
how
the Disco.
To make the Disco, right. And in fact, the first Disco, we didn't even take the plug. We took a Glide and cut the ends off it.
Yeah.
And welded up the ends, in what is that film that we did? Was it I think
Searching for the G-Spot?
It was either Searching for the G-Spot, or maybe, no, it actually wasn't. It was Searching for the Pro Stake. There's video of Searching for the Pro Stakes, where I'm in like this purpley reddish colored, like this wine burgundy colored Disco. It's a Glide. It's literally a Glide.
It's a Glide that you guys cut the end off and welded shut.
Yeah, well, I cut the ends off it, and then I welded a plate on the ends. I didn't just pinch it. I welded it, But basically, and then we took the Glide plug and chopped it up and then started to make the changes. And the changes were pretty radical. Obviously, when you look at the final disco, they were
yeah. This was back for everybody. Listen, this was back more in hand shaping days.
Yeah.
You would have a foam plug with Bondo and all that, and you would alter that plug. Just for people listening, when he says he chopped the plug up, it's a shape of the boat in a foam, and usually Bondo and all this, and you could shave it down and then pull fiberglass halves off and get a prototype
exactly.
out of. Yeah.
So it wasn't until the
Riot Air,
the booster, the turbo, that we started doing the basic design on CAD, and we would print out cross sections, and we would.
Were those the first? Was that your first experience with CAD when you got into like that?
Well, no, because for example, we would scan like the hammer. We scanned after we built the plug, we scanned it, and then we did some fluid dynamics testing of the scan. But also fluid dynamics back then, analysis was very rudimentary.
Yeah, yeah. I just had probably water, a little diagram of water.
It was linear. It was linear flow, or turbulent at best. And it was only turbulent in certain. You could only do so much. You couldn't do any chaotic flow. Even now, chaotic flow is. You can't really test chaotic flow under a surface. It's not. Even now, the programs are not that good. But those other boats there, what we started to do is we started to print out cross sections, cutting 3-inch slices of foam, putting them together on a beam. Or for example, with the Scorpion, actually at Savage, was actually a wood strip.
Yeah, the old wood strip days. Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually paddled the wood strip. So I wood stripped. We did, the drawing, but none of it was on computer. It was all done by hand. But it wasn't foam and Bondo. It was a wood strip that I then paddled the actual wood strip with fiberglass on it. And then once then I cut it up and I made some changes to it. And then we made a mold, a fiberglass mold, and we then made a fiberglass prototype. Mm-hmm. And actually, Andy Bridge made the fiberglass boats of the Scorpion. But so now we can do so many evolutions of the prototyping, and the holes and the edge shapes and all the rails and the rockers. You can move these things around, bring it back into simulation, move it around, bring it back into simulation. And there was no longer any need to pre-release the water off the bottom of the boat. So you go, well, but why not pre-release the water? It doesn't hurt you to pre-release the water off the bottom of the boat. Well, this is true, except that those things hang up on rocks. They're more susceptible to damage. So
well, I always figured they were a nightmare to mold.
No, it didn't help, or it wasn't easier or harder to mold. Like molding wise, you've created these little ridges everywhere, which you could argue makes the boat slightly stiffer, but at the same time, you've created these stress risers that if you hit it really hard, you can crack it. Yeah. More important is when you're going over a rock, you'd have a rock that would go grab.
Good luck.
It would take chunks of your boat off, So there was a disadvantage as far as wear and tear was concerned from having these textures on the bottom of your boats, and we'd all but negated the advantage. Mm-hmm. And that was the point to where we no longer need these features. So it's not that they didn't work. They did work given the imperfection of the other things around at the time.
Yeah, like you said, no free lunch. There's a trade-off. There's going to be a trade-off. They're going to work on certain circumstances, but then you get them out on like a creek boat of any type of creaking setting, or even not even creek boat, just going over a rock. Yeah, it's a nightmare. Yeah. I paddled one. I remember the first time getting in like a disco, and I'm like, oh my God, wow. It was like, because at the time you got to think I was like in medievals or something. I was like in a slicey boat. And there was like J-Big Grubbs was out there in like a disco. And I was like, wow, what is this thing? And he was just like throwing down. That's where, more aerial stuff started coming into play too. So that was definitely, a cool little transition of the boating scene right there to another level. And then slicey boats just went whoop, out the door, because then everybody wanted short volume poppy stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, then but the slicey stuff came back. I mean,
it did make a resurgence.
You had like the mid 90s, you had, the Mr. Clean, or late 90s, you had the Mr. Clean, and, we had the Slice, and we had the Trickster, the Dominatrix. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, no, the disco came before the Trickster Dominatrix. So then we went to, we had like the Glide Slice. Then we did the 007, which was the short puppy boat.
Oh, I remember the 007. That thing was tiny.
It was basically a pro. It's bigger than you think. It's 7'2".
Yeah, that's true. I guess it was big. I just remember it being small for whatever reason.
Right. It's just everything else was 10 feet.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
well, that maybe was what it was. Yeah.
you know, so, and the 007 actually wasn't a great boat. It was only good because it was the first of its kind. It was the first short boat with a planing hull. And you could argue that it was a predecessor to the Disco, which was really a refinement of the 007, and it
Yeah.
made what we wanted the 007 to do actually do.
Yeah.
But then right after the Disco, I did the Trickster, which was a 7.5 foot full slice. And then I did the Dominatrix, which was a 7.2 or 7.3 super slice. Then I did the Air, which was back to 6 feet, you know, 6'2" or something like that, you know. So they went up and down. We would go short and poppy, go, oh, I kind of miss throwing ends. And we go longer again. Oh, I kind of miss doing explosive stuff. And we go short again, you know, and it yo-yoed for a while.
Yeah, you got in big into the wave performance stuff too, and got away from the little holes doing a million cartwheels. You were more into more wave, like surfing stuff. So you went more that direction. I get it. That's how transitions happen. You know, everybody was still doing cartwheels and hole, and you were out surfing massive waves. And I was like, wow, I wish we had something like that around here. Because some of the waves, I was like, holy crap.
And then it turns out you do have them. Like, you know, you've got like, you know, in Columbus, Georgia.
Yeah.
And, you know, so these waves are out there. And I don't know why, you know, there's the one in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I mean, they're not everywhere and they're not in all the time. You've got them on the Gold, you've got them on the New, but you got to have the right flows and it's not there all the time.
They're
and
never consistent. Yeah.
Right. But they are there. And for whatever reason, I don't know why paddlers didn't, were they scared of them? I don't know. I don't know why, you know, because they were there, but nobody was going in them. Because then they also would have appreciated how fun these carvy boats were, you know?
Yeah.
Or when they did go in them, maybe they were just more interested in butt bouncing and getting big explosive airs and they just wanted to Pan Am all day long. I don't know.
Yeah, the big aerial Pan Ams and flips and all that. Everybody got into that for a while too. That's true.
Yeah, exactly. The butt bouncing, you know, but anyway, we digress. You know, so, but that's the main reason I got away from these textures in the bottom of the boat. But if you look at the Glide, I've gone back to the speed louvers, which was something that I developed for the 007 and the Showbiz, which is this release edge along the long axis of the boat. So if you look at the hull, it's kind of hard to see it in the orange one, but you can see it in the nose of the boat, but it's there in the tail of the boat as well.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, just click on like maybe the black or the yellow, maybe, I don't know. But anyway, so
what do you calling back here? Can you see?
No, I'm calling like you see that kind of edge that's right there. Yeah, that edge there.
Yeah, it's got a break right there.
Yeah, there's a break right there in the boat. You can see it also in the booster. If you go to the booster, you can see it. I've got it in the back of the booster.
Oh, it's very pronounced in the booster. I was going to ask you about that because you can see it right here, how pronounced it is in the booster. You're calling those speed groovers?
Speed louver. Speed
louvers.
Yeah, so I did that on the 007 and the Showbiz. The Glide originally had it, but I moved away from it from the Glide for a different reason. And what that does is it's kind of like having your cake and eating it. Is it allows you to have a flatter waterline for speed, but then it allows you to have a rocket rail for turning and carving. And it allows the back of the boats to sink down into the wave a little bit, so that it does bring the nose up, but not so much that it sucks the back down and makes it slow. But then if you end up backwards in a feature and you're paddling backwards, you do have that rocko. If you're spinning on a wave, then rocko is there, so you don't catch the tail when you're backwards. You know, so it's a little bit, you know, eating your cake and having it. And it's not magic, but it does make a difference. And on the Glide, I noticed it when I put them on the Glide from the early prototypes. So the Glide, we actually did 2 physical prototypes of. Over and above the 38 computer simulations. We did 2 prototypes. One didn't have the speed louvers.
The Soul Glide, the current Glide.
Yeah, the current Glide, yeah.
Okay.
It didn't have the speed louvers, and then the second one did. And it was the only change to the rocker. Most of the changes to the Glide were volume, and it was volume of the deck. I took a lot of volume out of the bow deck and the stern deck from the first to the second generation. I realized that there was no point having all that volume up there to make it a class 5 river runner. It's 7.9. Nobody's going class 5ing in a 7.9
Yeah.
So I might as well take the volume out of the nose. It's got just enough volume to where it's a dry ride down class 3, 4, but it's small enough to where you can blunt it and cartwheel it. And, I can go into a hole, I can throw 15 ends in the glide. It's a little bouncy because it's not a super slice. It's bouncy on the nose, but it'll do it, So that was something that I did for the second prototype. But the biggest, performance change was those speed louvers. And it was that little difference between you're on the wave, you're on the wave, you're on the wave, you're on the wave, you're off the wave, and no, you're still on. That was the difference.
What was the at one time you experimented with the swallowtail back design?
Mm-hmm.
You experimented with that. Are you currently still experimenting with things? What was your reason for having that? What was the boat that had it? I was trying to look at it. What was
the Techno was one of the Riot Techno
that was it.
That. And there were some other boats in the market, I think, that had them, but the Techno was the one that was the most radical. And that was a boat I designed with Arne Schäfflein. So he'd already put that in the first version of the Techno that he was working on with Eskimo. And the Eskimo decided they didn't want to build it, and he came over to Riot. But prior to the Techno, I'd done a boat at Riot that never went to production called the Wave. And the Wave had a deep swallowtail in the back of the boat. And so this was the era of butt bouncing, where people were getting into butt bouncing. They wanted to pop off the water flat. So they wanted to sit flat on the wave and bounce and just pop off the water. But then you lost all the speed when you were carving on edge. And so the idea of doing that was you shortened the water line when the boat was sitting flat, so it would butt bounce. But then when you put it on rail, you increase the waterline length so that it would carry speed through the carve, and it worked.
You did it in the front and back.
Well, yeah, because when you're back surfing, you want.
I was like, holy crap! I forgot about this Techno. It's crazy looking at it by today's standards. How aggressive that back and how that front. I remember the first time seeing that thing, I was like, what in the hell is that? I was like, wow, look at that front.
It was a good boat. The Techno was a very, very good boat. It was a boat I paddled for a very long time. It was one of the boats, I tend to move on very rapidly from boats because as a designer, if you look at, for example, the history of the boats at Riot, for example, I designed the hammer, I paddled the hammer. The day the hammer goes into production, I'm already working on the glide. I'm on to the next boat. I'm finished with the hammer. I'm done. It's in production now. I'm done with it.
Yeah, you can't sit around and keep paddling it all day and say, still a great boat. Yeah.
So it's a great boat. And I would paddle it if I was out creeking or if I was somewhere where the glide wasn't the right boat for it, I would paddle it. The same thing, the day the disco.
Well, when did you do this Techno? When was that? Where was that Techno in there?
The Techno came out the same year as the Air, which would have been, Disco was production in the fall of '99. So we had the first production boats at the World Championships in New Zealand, but I didn't paddle it because they wouldn't score butt bounce moves. They refused to score those. So I got back in the glide. But that was an example of, I'd already moved on from the glide by then, but I had to get back into it because they weren't going to score anything I did in the Disco, unfortunately. So, and then the Trickster was 2000. In 2001, and the Dominatrix was late 2001. So the Air was 2002, and the Techno was 2002.
And is that something you're wanting to revisit, that swallowtail design like that? Is that something that's still up there?
Not really.
You think it worked that well, or what's your opinion on it? Like, is it?
It did work. It did work. But it worked given what I was trying to accomplish at the time, which was a boat that would butt bounce into moves, but would carry speed on rail. But also you got to remember what the moves were. The Techno was a boat that was designed to win freestyle competitions, which could be in a hole, so it was slicey in the ends. It could be on a wave. It could be on a carvy wave. It could be on a bouncy wave. It could be on a wave hole. It was the boat of the time that was the equivalent of what an ICF freestyle boat is today.
Yeah. Okay.
But you would never enter an ICF freestyle boat in competition today in a boat like that, because what is scored and how it's scored. You know, there is no differentiation. The boats are so in order to get the points that you need, your boat has to be 6 feet, and you're never going to make a 6-foot boat fast. You're never going to make a 6-foot boat fast. So there's no point of trying to get that rail length by adding 3 inches on each end of a boat that's 6 feet. You're not going to gain anything.
Yeah. So that's what you were trying to do, is get a longer rail on the edge, which I mean, between the front and back, you probably add, 6-7 inches of
exactly. It was about 6-7 inches
on the boat. Did water seem to come between them though? Does water come through and come up between them and come around them?
No, not really. But what would happen is the boat would break. So right where you had that V, and then especially in the nose, you would constantly hit rocks, and eventually the boat cracked. And really, we could have rounded that off. It didn't have to be quite as sharp in that nose, the inner V, like where the 49 is. See where that 49 is on the red boat?
Yeah.
Basically in the center of the V. Right there, yeah. So the boat would crack in there if you hit it on rocks all the time.
I could see that.
So if I had to redo it, I would do it differently so that you wouldn't have, and that's a manufacturing constraint, a reality of plastic and how plastic flows in a mold.
Getting down in that V and those points.
Getting it, it's naturally a thin place when you make plastic. And then of course it's also a stress riser at the same time. So boats are going to break.
Yeah.
I've put them on, I didn't have a swallowtail on the Dragarosi Stinger, but I had wings, which kind of accomplished the same sort of thing on the Dragarosi Stinger. And there was the Dragarosi Fish that did a little bit where it had a fish tail, but it wasn't as dramatic or as deep as the Techno. But these boats came out not long after the Techno. It was still that same kind of era a little bit. The Dragarosi Fish was in 2004, 2005. And then you also had the Riot Turbo, which had wings. And, the idea was you're creating release when the boat's on rails. You've got that long edge length, but now we were trying to go from bouncing flat into moves to bouncing on rail by putting the wings near the back.
What is that? What were you calling this? Can you see it on, hold on. Can you see this? This is the Stinger.
That's the Stinger. That's the Stinger.
So this one, instead of doing a swallowtail, what do you call this design?
That's a wing. It's a wing.
So this is what you're calling the wing that you were just describing. It comes down and it breaks. For everyone listening, the Dragarosi Stinger comes down with a rail, and then it goes abruptly in at probably a 45-degree angle, and then it's got a tip that comes out another 6-7 inches right there.
So the idea there is that you would get the bounce started flat on the boat, and then you would then roll it onto the rail, and to give it like this extra ramp, if you like. It would allow it to pre-release and explode into the air. Oh, that's the Fish that you're looking at there now. And the Fish had that swallowtail. The Fish was the year before the Stinger. And that was still thinking a little bit like the Turbo, where we had the shorter edge length running flat, but the longer edge length on rail. But as you can see, it's a lot less pronounced, and I was already moving away from
this one looks way cleaner done than the Techno. Like it looks like it's like more efficient of a swallowtail. Am I correct on that?
Well, it was less dramatic. It had less of it. There was a less dramatic change in the boat speed from being flat to being on edge. Whereas, with the Techno, it was very dramatic. It was it was a different boat. When you were on rail, the Techno, it was like you just changed boats.
Yeah. Okay.
Flat. Okay. Whereas the Fish remained the same boat. It would accelerate a little bit when you put it on rail. The problem with the Fish was that it was so fast that it was very difficult to butt bounce, and butt bouncing was all the rage. And so it wasn't a particularly successful boat. Now I tried to accomplish that. I tried to get it to stall a little bit. If you look at the bottom of the Fish, there are these little cutaways in the hull, these little concaves in the hull of the boat. And I tried to create something a little bit like the speed louvers, where you would get, it's like kick rocker happening on a modern creek boat, kick rocker happening right behind your ass. Where the rocker changes, except that I didn't do that on a rail. I just did it on the planing surface so that it would suck down and bounce when it was flat. But when you put it on rail, it wouldn't do that.
You definitely went with a high back volume back here on the Fish.
Well, we weren't squirting. The idea wasn't to squirt. The idea was to stay in the hole.
Yeah, exactly.
all the volume in the center of the boat was so that it would stay in the hull. Yeah, so you can see there, like on each side of the fins, you see those concave cutaways. And the idea of those is,
what were you calling those?
They create a low pressure area, and it would make the back of the boat drop when you were flat, like a butt balancer. But when you put it on rail, it wouldn't do that, and you would have the speed. So it wasn't just making the edge longer, like the Techno did. It was also creating a stall. So you would be on rail, generate the speed, flatten the boat, it would stall, and then explode into the air. But the skill set required to do that was beyond the ability of 99% of paddlers, and so commercially it wasn't a very successful boat.
What were the fins helping with? The fins on the rails right there. What did they help with?
Drive, so that you could really tell the difference between the boat's speed when you were flat versus on edge, because like I said earlier, hard edges don't help a boat carve. In fact, they make the boat slip. They make it slippery, and unless you're very aggressively on edge, a hard edge is going to make the boat slide free. So putting the fin there would stop it from sliding free when you were on rail. It would help
load you up on higher on the wave. Was that the?
Well, no, it would just hold. It would just create edge hold, because as soon as you were flat, it would just slip sideways. And even if you're rolled a little bit on edge, the boat wants to slip sideways and naturally wants to break free and slip sideways. And so those fins would help it stay so that you could drive across the wave. Again, the problem there is that you're assuming that people have access to a wave that has space to move on. If your wave's only 3 feet wide or 4 feet wide,
those were useless. Yeah, I remember seeing them, and I was the same way back then. I was a little, I didn't really understand waves or anything back then, and I was like, why in the hell would I need a fin for? Yeah, because the wave I was surfing was, 4 feet high, and I was just carving back and forth with them. But on big, massive waves, you're saying that's where they really start opening up.
Yeah, because it allowed you, and again, it was compensating for the edge and rocker shapes not being what they are now. Just the access. It's hard to overstate how much of a difference it made. Two things for me in my career. When I moved to California in 2010, I started shaping surfboards on a regular basis in about 2006, 2007. And in 2010, when I moved to California, after selling my paddleboard company, you're turning out these surf shapes, and every single surfboard you do is a prototype.
Yeah.
Basically, every one is done, and you do thousands of these things. And so you move things around an eighth of an inch, and the board is different, and you learn this stuff. And so they're all designed on computer. So I was designing them on computer and then generating a board, and then I would do another one where you move, you move the rocker back at, an inch. Or you would narrow the tail by an eighth of an inch, or you would widen it, or you would move the white point forward 1 or 2 inches. And the board, the way it handled, was totally different. It was a completely different board. And so I learned a massive amount in the sort of the 5-6 year period that I was in California doing all these different surf shapes, both about how to understand how to use the computer programs, and secondly, how big of a difference it makes to move these little things around. And hang on. Yeah. And my 8-year-old wants junk.
Yeah. And this was when you were doing the Imagine boards or the Addison?
Yeah, well, Imagine initially. So the Imagine boards here in Montreal, and then I sold it to a company in California. And then after.
But you stayed working. You stayed working for them.
Right. So I worked for Imagine for 2 years, which was part of the contract, part of the sale. And then when I left Imagine, after that, I then started Corran Sup. And then again, so with Corran Sup, I did the same thing there. And then I sold Corran Sup to Riot. Actually, they bought Corran Sup, and that's when I started Soul. So both learning the computer programs and also learning how much difference it makes when you make the tiniest little change to all these different boats. And you go from spending, when you're hand shaping a glide, and it takes you 2 years to do 13 boats, which was the most extreme version of what I ever did.
Yeah.
To turning out 10 designs in 1 day.
Oh, wow.
When you're shaping boards.
I take it you didn't sleep much then.
I don't think that now. So what you never learned, for example, that allowed me to do the custom process that we have now. Just the technical part of being able to build the custom boat is only half the equation. you also need to be able to design a boat without making a prototype.
Yeah.
Because a customer is buying a $2,500 boat from you. There is no prototype. You have a conversation. You figure out what is just like you building a surfboard for somebody. You figure out what it is they want, where they're going to go, what their skill set is, the kind of waves they're going to be surfing, or the kind of rivers they're going to be running. And then you design the boat based on your accumulative experience. You email the CAD file to the factory, and they build the boat. And this guy
now, are you still offering this? Do you still offer this? Yeah, for people listening, that just so people understand what you're talking about, this is a service that you offer. Say I want a custom boat for me, and I'm like, I want it to do this, this, and this. I would contact you, and you would actually design and make a composite version of my vision, and working with you. And it would be a kind of a one-off design that no one else is. I didn't know if you were still doing that. You do that with Soul.
And the difference is, it's not like taking a fiberglass mold, making a boat out of it, and then cutting the seam or cutting the ends off or pinching it or shifting the deck. It's not that at all. It's a completely new boat from the ground up. Exactly. I mean, obviously, you get people who go, hey, I have an Axiom and I really love the Axiom, but I just wish it had a little bit more bow rocker, a little bit more knee room. Can you do that? Well, yeah, I can do that. But why? Any plastic boats is a compromise. You're trying to make a boat that's going to address the widest body range, in the widest skill set range, in the widest river conditions range as possible within a given design parameter. When you custom design a boat for anybody, you don't care about any of that. The only person this boat has to work for is you, your body size, your skill set, and where you paddle. And we don't care if it works for anybody else ever anywhere.
Yeah.
Which is
it's like well, that's how they do squirt boats, correct? So if I want
squirt boats are out of a mold. No, squirt boat is out of a mold.
I thought I would.
Cut it in volume to match you. They might shift the deck on the hull a little bit, given you got bigger feet or longer legs or shorter legs or bigger long torso. But it's out of a mold, and then it gets
adjusted to
the volume.
Yeah,
right. What I'm talking about is the entire boat from the ground up is designed from scratch.
So do you CNC that and then pull a plug off of it? How do you do it? Like,
well, no, we CNC, we go straight to mold. So what we do is we do the design, we CNC a female mold out of, it's kind of a foam material. It's not foam, but it's kind of a foam material. We then laminate the boat inside this one piece. There's no seam on the boat, so that's proprietary information. We laminate this boat one piece, and then we literally break the mold off of the boat.
Okay.
You couldn't make a second one if you wanted to. We break it off the boat.
So they break the mold when they make them.
Break the mold, yeah. So if you want a second one, we have to CNC a new mold.
The whole thing over again. The whole process has to go through again.
Well, you might use the same CAD file. And I've had people go, hey, I made a boat for them and their friend tried it and their friend really loved it, but they're 30 pounds lighter. And so we will take that boat and we will adjust it for their weight, and they make the same boat type thing. So I've done stuff like that where I want exactly what my friends got, but I'm just a little bit lighter than that.
Yeah.
You really telling me you paddle exactly like your friend? I love that boat. Okay, fine.
You're like, okay, all right. Well, man, how many? I know you might have close to 1,000 designs under your belt. Is there any one design that pops out to you as one of your like most prized baby or possession? I know that's a hard question to answer because you've got more than probably anyone I know in the industry as far as like personal top designs. I know there's other people that help out a lot too, but is there something that you're like, this one right here is my proudest moment? What is that one? I know it's like, which one's your favorite kid?
Yeah. Well, I guess it depends on what the focus is on the question, because you could say, which was my most successful boat, or which was the most groundbreaking boat, or which was the boat that I put the most love and effort to, So what was the most groundbreaking boat? You'd probably say the Fury. The Fury completely changed.
The Savage Fury, yeah.
Because it was the first planing hold boat ever designed for a river. It was the first boat that would spin on a green wave. Nobody had ever done that, and that went through 6 prototypes, which again, back in the day, that was a lot of prototyping for a boat, My most successful design was either the Corsica S at Perception, commercially, that sold the most, or the Booster.
Wow, look at that thing. Look at that back. That's kind of like a wing, right?
Well, that was because it had side cut. So that I was really getting into snowboarding, and it had side cut. The idea was that the boat would, turn with having negative, a negative outline, would turn like a snowboard on the water.
There's those dimples.
And that has to let that was the first boat with the dimples. The Hammer then also had the dimples, and the Showbiz had dimples. And then I started to move away from the Fish. Had a little bit of dimples on the bottom, but not as much,
Yeah. So a short answer would be, the Fury. That's what I'm
probably
taking.
The Fury was the most groundbreaking boat I've
It
ever
definitely
done.
was when I seen it. I was like, what in the hell is this thing?
Yeah, well, Bob McDonough. So one day, who Bob McDonough is? He was a designer for Reception. He did the Overflow, and
I think he's with Old Town now. He works for Old Town doing fishing kayaks.
Very, very, very good paddler, very accomplished designer.
Mm-hmm.
Bob McDonough, he's a legend guy, And I showed up at the Koi. Ken Ford was making a video. I think it was the video that he was making about the 1993. Was it 1993 Worlds? Or maybe it was off. Anyway, because when I started working on the Fury it would have been about 93 is when I started working on the Fury. The 93 I was in the Hurricane. So 94. So it wasn't the pre-Worlds. I don't know why, but anyway, we were at the Akoi.
Was this Savage's first boat? Was this first
boat?
boat?
No. We did the Scorpion. So 94.
Scorpion was the first one.
The Scorpion and the Gravity in 94. But I was already working on the Fury.
Okay.
By the end of 94. Again, the same thing. It's like by the time the Scorpion hit the market, I was already on to the next thing. Or maybe 95. Anyway. And so actually it was 95. It was 95 when I had this Fury, and I pulled it out of the back of my truck and I put it on the ground. And immediately there was this group of people that kind of accumulated around the boat. It was purple. It was this purple prototype that had the side cut. It was a radical departure from the early Furies, which looked a little bit like the Whippet, if you like. And it kind of had a semi-planing hull, the center. The Fury 2 was the boat that was used in Paddle Quest and the boat that I competed in at the 95 Worlds. So I don't know if there's photos of the Fury 2 in some of these images, but
I was just looking at the Scorpion next to the Fury. The drastic transition between those two is amazing. That's drastic.
I mean, a planing hull boat and a displacement boat based on slalom concepts versus a planing hull boat based on snowboarding. So anyway, Bob McDonough walks up and he looks at this boat and he just shakes his head and he goes, "But this isn't even a kayak anymore."
It's basically a snowboard you're sitting in.
Right. And I get where he's coming from. At the time, I just scoffed at him and I was like, "You've got no vision," But I totally get what he was getting at, which is, what was a kayak? A kayak was 9-10 feet. It was round. It was the Super Sport. It was the Hurricane. It was the Scorpion. It was the Transition. It was the Piranha Master Bat or whatever it was called,
Acrobat.
Magic Bat. Yeah. Magic Bat.
Okay.
So volume in the center, the slicey ends, the narrowest point of the boat is in the middle, the widest point of the boat is in the center. It goes back, it's got a round bottom. It's a kayak. It's what someone from 1930 would recognize as a kayak, which is what we were still paddling in 1994. Okay. And so, correct, this isn't even a kayak anymore based on your criteria of what a kayak should look like, which is an evolved version of a dancer. Shorter, more volume in the middle, less volume in the ends, but a dancer nonetheless. Which is what the Super Sport, the Hurricane, and all these other boats were. So yeah, sure, he was right. This isn't even a kayak anymore by what we defined a kayak at the time. Now, of course, the Fury is exactly what kayaks are. Nobody designs a play boat that doesn't have a planing hull.
Yeah.
I mean, there were things on it that didn't work. The side cut, it was okay. It wasn't great.
Yeah.
But again, the prototyping process, it was so long and cumbersome. The boat worked. And part of the side cut thing, it wasn't just the carving, it was having the width in the ends. So you had the support in the ends to help it get on a plane so it didn't bog down in a wave, and to break free and spin on a green wave. And so by increasing surface area away from where the paddler was, I was trying to get it to plane. And initially I had it straight, but then it didn't turn very well because the ends were so wide and they had no curve to the outline. And I didn't want to narrow the ends in order to get that curve to the outline.
Which is where the Scorpion was. The Scorpion was more traditional, just straight
exactly.
Back.
And so I was like, hey, why don't I do like a snowboard? And why don't I make it carved from the middle of the boat by narrowing the center and then allowing it to turn along its neck, which works, but it would only carve a given radius. When you have a positive outline, you can adjust the radius by how much you lean the boat and how much forward weight or back weight you put on the boat, depending on how much of the outline you engage. On the Fury, you only had the radius from the widest point of the nose to the widest point of the tail. That was your carving radius. And you could have changed it a little bit by the amount of edge you gave it, but not much. So it took a certain size wave to make the Fury carve a turn. Otherwise, you have to turn it flat. So it didn't really work in the carving sense of things, but it did accomplish what I was trying to do, which is make the boats end. So
yeah, well, I know it was painful. It was painful for me to sit in.
It was painful for everybody to sit in. Nobody thought that boat was comfortable. My God,
it was so painful. I would like to see something like that, again. I didn't know if that was something else you had thought about, maybe experiment, but obviously make it where people can fit in it.
Yeah, the Fury, I started working on a new Fury about 4 years ago, and I sort of threw it out there. But the thing is, the Furies, it was such a groundbreaking boat. It was so revolutionary. It changed the entire sport of kayaking. After the Fury, nobody ever did another displacement hold play boat.
They might be hybrid. A lot of people experimented with hybrid displacement.
For a year or two.
Yeah. And then that's true. Everybody just said they just threw out displacement and just like went flat. Right. Especially when it's
the kinetic, the whippets, the whiplash, the kinetic. I think the blade, the razor and the blade from Piranha, they had the planing hole in the center and the displacement ends on the boat. So there was like a year or two period where people were trying to get their heads around what makes a planing boat work and why to do it. A lot of them were like, oh, well, he's put edges on the boat. I suppose we should put an edge on the boat, but we don't understand why. So here's an edge.
Yeah, it'll work. Yeah.
Mark Lyle was one of the first people to get it, with the Vertigo. He understood it. He looked at the Fury and he got it. And the Vertigo was a more market adapted boat than the Fury. It gave everybody access to a planing hold boat.
Because
and of course,
Savage was in North Carolina for a lot of people. Savage Kayaks. What part was it in Asheville?
It was in Asheville. Yeah, we were in Asheville, North Carolina. Yeah. So,
did you have your own manufacturing and everything, an oven and everything?
We did eventually. So we started off making the boats at Hydra.
In Knoxville, Tennessee.
Yeah, in Knoxville.
Yeah, Hydra Kayaks. Yeah.
Yeah. And then New Wave. So New Wave got an oven. They bought Infinity, and they had they bought the Infinity Quantum. And then they did the Sleek and the cruise control, and they had this oven and they had molding time.
This was in Asheville.
No, they were up in Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania.
I was in I forget where in Pennsylvania.
But you were so you were subcontracting out the Fury and the Scorpion.
No, not the Fury. No, not the Fury. We subcontracted the Scorpion and
Gravity.
The first production run of the Gravity to New Wave.
Okay.
And then we purchased an old oven from Hydra, was
a clamshell
of a bigger company, and we bought. No, it was a Shuttle. This thing was this huge monolith. It was this giant oven.
For people listening, Hydra had a couple of boats, the Dragonfly and Dragonfly 2. I think that's all they did. I don't know.
No, Hydra made the Tom Johnson. No, not the Don McLaren Matador.
This was a whitewater boat?
It was a whitewater boat. They did the Tom Johnson Centaur.
Sounds like a restaurant.
Which was a C1, and they did a C2, and then they did the Dragonfly, which was a sort of a dancer knockoff.
Mirage dancer type boat, right?
And then they kind of
They just never took off for whatever reason. I would see them. I lived in Knoxville at the time, and it was funny. I'd kind of see them around, but they just never took off. I had no idea that you'd kind of like were getting them molded there. But you only did that just a short amount of time.
Oh, like a month and a half or 2 months. It was very, very short.
Sent them to New Wave.
Yeah, well, then at that point, New Wave bought an oven, and the quality was, they would only make us linear boats, and at the time, Crosslink was the better material, and New Wave was making Crosslink. So we went to New Wave, but then we bought from the parent company of Hydra, we bought this old oven that was kind of like Perception's oven, their very first oven, Old Faithful, and it was what it was called. And then they had their new oven when I went to Perception called Enterprise, which was
it's still there. It's still there.
Yeah, I know. I don't know if Old Faithful is still around, but anyway, so this thing was that Savage board was a horrible oven. It was absolutely terrible. But we started molding the Fury ourselves. The Fury was never molded out of house. It was already molded in-house at Savage. And then shortly after that, I ended up leaving Savage and I started Riot.
Yeah. Riot by far, definitely. I mean, yeah, that one changed a lot. You know, I've seen a lot of Riot designs that I was just like, wow, because they were very, I guess, more worldwide.
Riot grew, I mean, you never really know because everybody lies about their figures, but I think that by about 2000, so when the Glide came out, I mean, we pre-sold 1,800 Glides. Pre-sold.
Wow.
1,800 Glides. You know, I mean, whitewater kayaking was a different sport back then. Now, if you sell 1,000 boats total in the lifetime of the boat,
you won.
Great. You won. You won the lottery. Back then, we pre-sold 1,800 Glides, and in the same year, pre-sold like 800 showbiz. You know,
the showbiz was that was one of the first attempts at kind of a budget-friendly boat. I think it came in at like $699 or something with a
it was $699 because boats by then were $1,000,
and that was seemed crazy to everybody. And I remember the showbiz. I said, "See, that's what Dagger needs to start doing. We got to stay in the market because it had a drop seat, just molded it in, and you would foam it out." I was like, "Actually, it's a pretty solid design boat too."
It was kind of the first half slice.
It really was, yeah.
Actually, well, that's not true. That's not true. The sleek was a half slice. Okay, the Jimmy Snyder sleek was a half slice for sure. But it
was
took
long.
us in the direction of a planing hold half slice because you could squirt the stern, not easily, but you could squirt the stern.
Mm-hmm.
But it had volume in the bow. It was sort of this playful river runner. It was based on the Glide, so it had the performance hull of the Glide, but it was shorter. It had more bow volume than the Glide. It was shorter than the Glide. You could with the showbiz, which then became a superstar when we put fancier outfitting in it. You could win a rodeo on Sunday and go creeking on Monday in the same boat.
Yeah, I'm going to pull it up here.
We hadn't seen that since the hurricane days. Yeah, there you go. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it was like when I seen it, you can see how it's just got like a molded in drop seat, and you just throw some hip pads and a foam in it. It's got a bulkhead, and you're good. And it is definitely more like an older style, like half slice.
Yeah, it was about 7'6" or 7'8", so it was just a little bit shorter than the Glide, and it had, you know, so those are those speed louvers. You can see that boat there had 4 speed louvers on each end. With the Glide now, the modern Glide only has the 1, but you can see those steps, and the idea was to break down the water because it had more rocker than the Glide, so that you could creek it. But then it made it slower on a wave, and so we tried to, you know, we learned from the 007 that it had those speed louvers, and we try to, you know, again, you always got to remember the time. Prototyping was a laborious process. When you got something wrong, you had a lot of time and money invested in getting it wrong.
That you'd have to redo the whole process over again. Yeah,
you know, so, and that was a time when experimenting was everything. If you didn't revolutionize the sport every 6 months, you were nowhere. EJ made a great comment. EJ made a fantastic comment. This was the 1992 Worlds in Spain. 1991. No. 1999 Worlds in Spain.
Okay.
And, hang on a second. 99 was...
EJ was probably in an RPM then.
No. 99 was
wave sport,
New
probably.
Zealand, 2001.
Yeah.
So 2001 was sort in Spain. So it was either 2000 or 2001. I think it was 2001. EJ and I decided to drive over to Sao, where we had the 1992 Olympics, because we both competed in the Olympic Games in 1992. So it was 2001 because it was exactly 10 years.
Yeah.
Okay? And we pulled up and we got out, and the people who were paddling slalom were in the same boats that they had been in when EJ and I were competing in slalom in 1992. It was still 4 meters long.
No change.
There was no change. There was the boats had changed a little bit in their like little details of the shapes. It was still 4 meters long. There was still 60 centimeters wide. You were still making the skill set that you used. You were still turning low in the eddies. It's not like when the rule change happened in 2005, where they went to 3.5 meters, then all of a sudden the fastest way down the course was a straight line between 2 points, where everybody just sprinted to the gate, stuffed the gate, pivoted, sprint to the next gate. They were still doing these long Richard Fox style eddy turns, moving around the river. And this was a time when in freestyle, boats were changing radically every 6 months. If you were in a boat that was 6 months old, you were in old technology.
You're behind the times.
You're behind the times. And EJ said, imagine this. I could get in, if I was as fit now as I was in 1992, I could take my boat from 1992 with the skill set from 1992 and be competitive in this race this weekend. If you're in a freestyle boat that's 6 months old, with a skill set that's 6 months old, you're nowhere. Now it's flopped over. It's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
Freestyle boats and skills haven't changed in the decade.
No, you could get a Jitsu, a Disco, a Riot, a Rockstar, and be competitive with.
You'd be competitive. Yeah, the 5 is the better boat, but you would be competitive.
Exactly. You would still be. You wouldn't be blown out of the water.
Right. Whereas if you got into a slalom boat now that was 10 years old, the skill set that's 10 years old, you're nowhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're struggling. You're on the struggle bus. Well, man, yeah, I got one more question for you, and it's the looking glass Batman, flying Batman. I gotta ask this: what was your thought process? What boat were you in, and what was your thought process of running Looking Glass Falls, wearing a Batman? Was it a helmet? Did you just glue?
No, it was a full helmet. It was a helmet that I designed. On my free time in the R&D shop at Perception, I decided
it's one of the most iconic pictures
that come out.
Yeah.
And I was 18 or 19, and I was 19, and I decided that I wanted to make myself a Batman helmet, and the idea was squirt boating. So you had Jesse Whittemore with his Darth Vader helmet, and you had Jeff Snyder with his fireman helmet, and and then a lot of the squirt boaters were wearing the old Nazi helmets and stuff like that. So these glitter fancy helmets was kind of a thing in squirt boating, and I was getting into squirt boating a little bit, and I was also at that point working on the first hybrid squirt boats, i.e. volume in the center and cutaway ends. I did a boat at Perception called the Blackouts.
So you laid up your own helmet in a Batman.
Yeah, exactly.
That was something you wore. Okay. I just want to get to the part where you looked at that and you were like, what boat were you in?
It was a prototype boat that I was working on. So, again, it was the times of progression was very slow. It was a hard sell to get Perception to do the Corsica. It was a very hard sell. I really had to push hard for that boat.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the features on it, like the big cockpit, you cannot imagine how hard it was just to get a keyhole cockpit.
The large keyhole, because at the time they were very tiny.
They were very tiny cockpits. It was such a fight, and the whole safety angle was a no-go because the management couldn't get their head around people are running stuff where you would ever require this.
Yeah, exactly.
And two things happened that came into just to go off on a tangent a little bit. Two things happened. Somebody died in a danza on the Nantahala where they got pinned in their boats, no fault of Perceptions at all, but they got pinned in their boats because they got stuck in a conveyor belt that had been dumped into the Nantahala River by a constructor. And the boat got stuck in this conveyor belt and out in the middle of the river. And by the time they got him out of the boat, he was dead. And the family sued Perception. And the argument was that if the cockpit had been bigger, he'd been able to get out of the boat. So Perception is facing this lawsuit. The other thing is Bill Masters, who was the owner of Perception, was getting older and his knees weren't working very well. And he was having a hard time getting in and out of the dancer. And I convinced him that it would be easier for him and his old friends to get in and out of the boats more comfortably if it had a big cockpit.
Like an oval. It used to be a complete circle almost.
Almost, yeah. Like the dancer cockpit was almost, it was like an egg,
Yeah.
Whereas the Corsica cockpit was much more of a literally a keyhole,
Yeah.
So anyway, so just in like blunt ends, like the kick rocker, the nose of the Corsica with and by today it's pointy, but at the time that was a blunt end.
Yeah.
It was a huge fight, to get those.
So how did that get to the waterfall?
So I was working on a boat in my free time. I wanted to show Bill that I could do something really, truly unique and groundbreaking left to my own devices.
Okay.
And so my free time, I would go in there at nights. And I was working on this boat, and I built they wouldn't give me any oven time. And so I basically built a plug, made a mold, and built a Kevlar boat out of this mold.
Okay.
Because I wanted to show Bill, and it had like the beginnings of a planing hull.
Yeah.
It was very, very flat, but it still had rounder than like the whippet, but it was already like
about 7.5 feet. What?
No. It was long. No. By today's standards, It was long. It was probably 10.5 feet.
10.5 feet. Okay.
But the Corsica was 10.4 because Bill settled on 10.4. Originally, I had it at 10. He was like, no, make it 10.4 because my generation, we understand 10.4, buddy.
Yeah.
Okay, whatever. He added 2 inches, and he wanted the ends more pointy. So I added the 2 inches. The ends got a little bit pointier. Back, you got to remember the day. You want to make a boat longer, you didn't scale up your CAD file. You slap Bondo on the end.
Yeah, you glued it on there. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it was probably then about 9.8 or 9.7 or somewhere around there. So it was a little bit shorter than the Corsica.
This boat doesn't have a name, by the way.
No, never became anything. No. But it had the hung seat like the Showbiz.
Okay, a drop-in molded in.
It had the drop seat because the prices of boats were already starting to go up. And I thought it would be a good idea to try this. But I wasn't so much thinking as a price. I was thinking structure. I was thinking if you had this drop seat in a boat that had the full back, you were creating a structure in the boat. Because back then, remember, it was foam walls, and when it was seat, the boats would always fold.
Everybody was worried about their boat folding on them. The boats were going to fold.
So it ended up not being the right direction to go. But anyway, so it's what I did with this particular boat. And then the reason why I didn't take it, because we had the Corsica S prototype by then. Maybe the Corsica S came from this boat. I forget. Maybe it evolved from this boat, and I had the Corsica.
Yeah.
But anyway, I was concerned. I wasn't worried about my back, but I was worried about the boat folding and breaking my legs.
Folding on impact.
Yeah.
Okay.
Remember, boofing? We just invented the boof.
Yeah, everybody used to just go off things and hang their hands back like that.
We just invented the boof.
Oh, and you had a good boof. You had a good.
Yeah, I had a good booth. So boof's 2 years old, and you do everything with the booth. The booth is the answer to all problems. You boof it.
Yeah, just boof it. You're fine.
Yeah, and we didn't know. We just didn't know how high you could boof. We didn't know what the body could take. I mean, now you're like, well, duh. But
yeah,
at the time, I think the highest waterfall, that people were running was about 30 feet. At the time. 30.
And you're right. A lot of they would just paddle really fast. And hang on. But you started experimenting, catching booth.
No, it wasn't me. Now other people were playing at the booth. Other people were I didn't invent the booth. But definitely I was part of that group that was sort of experimenting with that kind of technique. But by the time I ran Looking Glass Falls, we had perfected the booth. We as an industry had perfected the booth. And it was the go-to answer for all problems related to creeks was you booth it, right?
Including 70 feet.
Including 70-foot waterfalls. And I had started running bigger and bigger waterfalls by then. I was playing around. By the time I ran Looking Glass, I'd already run Bald River Falls, and so tribute to the Eagle, to the Tellico.
But you also ran one in South Africa, right?
I ran a big one in South Africa, or 2 big ones in South Africa. I'd run.
But you didn't boof those.
No, those were pre-boof.
Okay, that's what I was saying.
Those were paddle really fast and drop off. And I hope you
I just always wanted to ask you that because I get it at the time. I was just wondering your thought process walking up to the drop, looking at it, and being like, I'm just going to carry a big fatty boof right off the lip.
Right, and that's what it was. I looked at it and I was like, oh, look, the perfect waterfall. It's a perfect takeoff. It's vertical, and the pool's not very deep. It's only 5 feet deep, but that's okay. I'll boof it.
Just boom. Yeah.
But I was
Did you
worried
get
about the
injured?
boat doing this.
Did you get in? Did the boat fold on you?
No, but it broke it. It cracked it. The boat from the back deck all the way behind the cockpit, it cracked and went all the way around. Now, if I had been in a plastic boat and it had folded, it might have saved my back.
Yeah, because I didn't know this. I didn't know it was Kevlar, because that Kevlar, that energy just went straight into you.
Straight
You're
into
right.
me. Yeah.
If it would have been plastic, it would have absorbed it like a crumple zone almost. Wow.
Exactly.
Because
Exactly.
obviously I see the picture and the picture's looking halfway and everybody looks at that. And I'm like, oh God, I'm just grabbing my back every time I see that picture. But I mean, I always wondered how the landing was.
Painful.
Did you break your back? Was it a broken back?
Yeah, I broke it. Yeah. I was in traction for 3 months.
Oh, wow.
In a hospital for 3 months. And they told me I would walk, but not well. I would never run, and I would certainly never paddle again.
Whew. Well, you proved them wrong. Well, all right, man. I don't we're going on, over an hour and a half. I definitely appreciate you coming on, dude. And is there anything else you want to add, or
No, I mean, I guess just getting back to the original point of the whole thing was which was, our creek boats, the best thing to be putting beginners in and intermediate paddlers in. And I think if we go back to that point, I think we as an industry need to learn from the mistakes that we made in the past. The mistake we made in the past was we put everybody in a playboat, and it didn't serve paddling overall, big picture. And I think we're making the same mistake again on the opposite end of the spectrum. We swung the exact opposite. And there was a brief period in time when we were putting beginners in the right boats, which were playful river runners. And my opinion is that I think we will get more people into the sport if the boats that they're in are allow them to enjoy the paddling experience more, because the creek boats don't allow that unless you push yourself, and not everybody wants to do that. And if we put people in boats that are going to make class 2 exciting and fun and rewarding, and the learning curve rewarding without being scary or intimidating, I think we will see more people stick with it, and I think we'll see more people talk their friends into it.
Awesome. I definitely agree with that. Well, man, so if people want to get a hold of you, you have your store. It's Gravity, right? The name of your store?
Gravity Sports in Montreal. Otherwise, it's soulwaterman.com. I'm there as well.
And there you go. Well, dude, I definitely appreciate you. I won't keep up any more of your time. Thanks a lot for taking the time and coming on and chatting away. I could always talk to Corran. You got tons of stuff.
Well, and I can always talk to you. I miss the Southern accent.
All right, man. Well, I tell you what, we'll definitely, we could do this again sometime. Let's see what's happening. But yeah, Corran, thanks a lot. And I appreciate you, dude. And that's it. That's a wrap, man. We'll see you.
Cool, man. You have a good one.
All right. See you, man.